And in its most basic form, bitrate is What's up, guys? So in my last video, I said I would explain what bitrate is. In its most basic form, bitrate is the amount of data that your camera encodes while recording video. In other words, it's all the data that your camera takes in for each individual frame in your video footage. So in essence, the higher your bitrate is, the higher quality image you're getting from your camera. It doesn't go for photography, but it is for videography. However, this comes at the expense of file size. So the larger your bitrate, the larger your file size. And those two are interchangeable, and I'll show the graph right here, but as your bitrate goes up, your file size goes up as well. It's like a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, cinema cameras like Canon's C300, C200, C100 series, they take cards called CFast cards, which can take in, a higher bitrate and record higher data video footage than a regular SD card like many DSLRs like my Canon EOS RP does. There are certain exceptions to that, like the Canon 5D Mark IV and the 1DX series. They can also take CFast cards. Now, bitrate is not to be confused with video resolution, because resolution is the pixel size of your image. So 1920 by 1080, or you have 4K, or even 720. That's just the raw image size that you have. So that applies to pictures too. But bitrate is the data that image has, that single frame. Also not to be confused with video compression codecs like H.264 or MPEG-2. Now you might see those while you're editing your footage, and when you bring it in and Premiere tells you that your timeline is in H.264 or something like that. Most DSLRs record in H.264 because that is the most common compression codec for cameras like those. Now, according to SCW, which is a surveillance camera website, 1080p video needs to be recorded at a bitrate no less than 5 megabits per second in order to actually look like 1080p HD. What does that mean? It means basically your 1080p video needs to be recorded at least 5 megabits per second to actually look like it's in HD. Otherwise, if you have less than 5 megabits per second, your video is going to look pixely and really sort of less ideal than regular HD would look. Now, when you think of HD, you think of the videos that you watch online on YouTube, or even HD TV if you have cable, or streaming services or anything like that. That's an all proper HD. However, they're recording at higher bit rates than 5 megabits per second, because if you go below that, that bit rate is going to group up pixels of the same color, or if there's no motion in your video, it's going to group those pixels together to save space, because the lower bit rate will give you a lower file size. So like I was saying, a higher bitrate gives you a higher quality image, but it also gives you a larger file size. Now this only goes up to a certain point, because if you have your bitrate so high, but you're still capped at 1080, your video is only going to look so good in 1080 until you upscale to a higher resolution like 4K or 8K. And when you upscale these resolutions, usually the bitrate goes with it, because if you kept 4K video at the same bitrate as 1080, it would look worse than the 1080. And the reason for that is because of the bitrate per resolution size. There's a certain ratio that you need to have for your bitrate and your resolution size. If you kept that same bitrate for a higher resolution, it would not look as good. So the All-I and the IPB bitrates that I mentioned in the last video are Canon-specific compression methods. As I was saying, All-I allows for a higher quality image because of the higher bitrate that it allows than IPB. And this doesn't mean that IPB is bad, it just means that All-I is better quality, but it also means you're upping your file sizes. Now, those All-I files are 3 times larger than IPB files, which is a pretty considerable number. Like I was saying, my Canon RP shoots at IPB instead of All-I, so my file sizes are much smaller, but the bitrate isn't quite as high. It's important to mention that IPB isn't horrible bitrate. Your video does not look terrible compared to All-I. It still looks good. For comparison's sake, YouTube when you upload a video, no matter what bitrate you upload it at, caps your bitrate at 8 to 12 megabits per second at 1080p HD video. So my Canon EOS RP, which records at 60 megabits per second or 30 megabits per second, is capped to that 8 to 12 that YouTube allows. So that core difference between all I bit rates and the IPB bit rates are less noticeable on a platform such as this, but it still gives you a crisper looking image. So you will notice a difference, but it's not as crucial as some people make it out to be. So the last important thing to mention is that when you are rendering your video, when you're done editing and you're ready to export, and you render that video to get ready, you can render that video at constant or variable bit rates. And what that means is, if you have a constant bit rate, that means that you set your bit rate at a certain number. So let's say you set it at 12 for the maximum of YouTube. That bit rate will never drop below 12, and it will never go above 12. You will stay at a constant 12 megabits per second throughout that entire video. If you choose to have your video go to variable bit rate, that means that you set your maximum, and that whenever your video sees fit, it will drop below that to save you file size. Now, if you're going for straight quality, I would always recommend that you export your videos at constant bitrate, so that way you're not losing anything at any point. Because if you export a video with variable bitrate and you get to a certain point and you notice, hey, my frame over there is a little pixely looking, it doesn't look so good. Yeah, that's because your video thought it was important to drop the bitrate there so that you can save some file size. So that's all I have about bitrate, you guys. If you found this video helpful like I hope you did, drop a like down below and hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more from me, and you have yourselves a great day.